Welcome, everybody, to the Examine Life podcast, where we take life's thorniest questions and deconstruct them in pragmatic and actionable ways so that you can lead a more productive, intentional, and examined life. Today's question is, what's the secret to good sex? It's an R-rated or NC-17 conversation, and I am joined by my friend Natassia Miller. How's it going?
Great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So I gave you the warning. You know, there's the whole time before recording, I've had this like, let's talk about sex, baby. I've had the Salt and Pepper song in my head, and I just want to point out, really, I was like, maybe she's too young to know this. So like, that song.
No, I know the song. Yeah.
Okay, good. I think some people won't know the song, but side note on that is I went to dinner with Peppa twice from Salt and Pepper, and it was
really
like, yeah, she dated a friend of mine for a little while. She's like a complete sweetheart. Her name's Sandy. And it was funny because my wife, who's 3 years younger than me, they used to sing Push It when they were like 11, cassette. And it's like meeting your childhood. and Lisa was there too. So shout out to
awesome.
Peppa. Shout out to Sandy. Yeah, if you're listening. So yeah. And I need to give myself a warning. I get super personal in this podcast, but I need to remember that now when I'm speaking about this topic, I need to rein myself in because there's other counterparties involved. So
yeah, I go through the same thing with my partner too. It's fine.
So Natassia is a former investment professional, and she's now the founder and CEO of Wanderlust, and also a sexologist in training. Is that the right way?
I'm getting my certification now. Yes.
To describe you. Before we talk about what it means to be a sexologist, tell us a bit about how did you go from hedge funds to, the intimate land of sexology?
Yeah, it's very unexpected, and it amuses a lot of my former colleagues. So after college, I worked in wealth management in Brazil, where I'm originally from. And then I worked in hedge fund sales. I had a good time. Like, my competitive advantage has always been, in the client-facing sales side. And that's translated really well to what I do today, especially talking on camera and connecting with our community and making a lot of presentations. But I wasn't fulfilled by what I did, like the reason why a lot of people leave finance. And I really reflected on what was a legacy that I wanted to leave behind. It wasn't obviously super sharp in my mind at the time, but I just knew that it wasn't that. And I was getting close to age 30. It's like that Saturn return where you start, there's upheaval in your life, like between your late 20s and early 30s, and you really reflect on how you want to move forward. And a good friend of mine who's very successful and older in Brazil, he told me once that your 20s are to really just try anything and see what sticks. Your 30s are for you to hunker down and get good at it so that like your 40s and beyond, you make money doing it, right? And I love that, and it always stuck with me. So I took that very seriously when I was getting closer to age 30, and I decided to come back to the US to become an entrepreneur. So I'm also an American citizen, and because I went to college here in the city, in New York, I had a whole network. And I founded another wellness company. It was a movement modality that a friend of mine wanted to scale, and she already had a proven concept. But unfortunately, we launched right before COVID. So long story short, scaling a movement modality directly online when it's still unknown, like if Pilates had launched online originally and not an IRL community, it's very hard. It's a very saturated market. So a year and a half later, I decided to leave and really reflected on what I wanted to do next. I really liked being an entrepreneur, but I wasn't quite sure. And then I realized, like, if there's something that I've always loved and been so curious about is how we all relate to sex and relationships. And I've always had an ease in talking about it because my mom just always grew up talking to me about sex in a way to like teach me to protect myself. I think that's just how like moms tend to be, you know, with daughters, but she was always very open about it. So that gave me a lot of ease. And I decided to enter the sexual wellness space.
Wow. Oh my God. I have so many questions. Do you remember I have two daughters, still not at the age. Well, maybe that's an interesting question because, you know, the stork story, you know, they're starting to question, you know, the starting point of intercourse, my eldest. So, you know, the chips, Santa's starting to become make-believe. So
wait, how old
so
is
the
she?
magic, she's 9.
Okay. That's
she's not
totally
as,
normal.
I would imagine. I mean, she still believes in Santa, but I think she's deeply skeptical, and she's a very logical person. She's like, wait a minute. So, you know, how does this happen? Well, I haven't had it yet. But do you remember the first conversation your mom had about sex with you?
Yeah, I was much younger than that. I think I was 5, and there was a book. The book still exists, but it's a book that explains to kids how children are made. And they do give the example of the stork. If I'm not mistaken, like in the book, they explain that that's not exactly how it works, but it's like, you know, like the man has a penis and the woman has a vagina, and like that's how it's done. But like in a very clean, you know, child-centric like manner. And so I understood the mechanics of it early on. When I was 8 was when my mom had like a bigger conversation with me about it. So it's perfectly normal, and it's frightening, I think, as a father to hear this.
Yeah.
But today, children on average tend to be exposed to porn at age 11.
And that's men and women?
Yeah.
Boys and girls?
Yeah. And especially
11,
with kids growing up with cell phones and just, you know, if you don't give access, like their friend has access and then they're over at their friend's house and, you know. So I remember my first encounter with porn was like that. I was at a friend's house. Her older brother was watching like, you know, a tape like on his TV. And we VHS, and we walked in and I was like, whoa, what is this? You know? And so there's a lot that you can't filter by nature.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I was just going to say the best thing that you can do is educate them and make them feel comfortable in coming to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Did your father play a role in conversations about sex?
Not much. I mean, he was there, but he thought it was kind of like he felt uncomfortable about it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to stick with your career trajectory. So you're in finance, then you try a movement modality, and say a little bit more about the texture, the breadcrumbs that led you towards kind of exploring sex as a commercial idea.
Yeah, so the sexual wellness industry, in the past, it was like the seedy sex shops that you would never want to step into and just very like male focused. If you think about like even like how the dildo is, you know, it's not really made for how a woman actually gets off. And so there's just a lot of the industry that historically has been not very approachable. And I'd say over the last 6-7 years, a few sexual wellness brands have come about and have really rebranded the space and made it more tasteful, more approachable, more inviting for women as well. So I noticed that there was this opportunity in the market where, you know, it's a market that has a lot of demand and it's not saturated yet. So like in business-wise, that was my angle. And then just as an interest of, I feel like you need to work with something that you're truly curious about because you know, a passion can be a little bit overrated, but when this really strikes your curiosity, like you will go through and really try to find the solutions to help other people. So and then when I was thinking about Wanderlust, you know, reflecting on what companies normally launch with, which are lubes and sex toys, and they're companies that are doing that super well, one thing that I've always received as feedback from, you know, from my sexual partners is that I communicate very well. I'm very open and direct and honest. And most people don't have that experience. And even just talking to my girlfriends about it, like you realize people just have a hard time talking about sex. So I wanted to build something that would really help people communicate better, because that's at the core of any good sex life, right? That is being able to talk about it with your partners and get to know yourself and your partner better. That was the root of Wonderlust, and the reason why we launched with an intimacy card deck to help couples talk about sex in a way that actually works, but doesn't feel like homework. It doesn't feel like you're in therapy. It feels like a great date night experience as well.
Got it. So Wonderlust is a deck of cards that basically helps you communicate with your partner about sex?
Yeah. So Wonderlust is the name of the company, our sexual wellness company, and we're coming out with more products. But the intimacy card deck is our first product. I call that it's the mindful intimacy card deck. That's the name of it. Yeah.
It's like SYP for
Yeah.
It's like existential intimacy card deck. Oh,
exactly.
Man. When your friends were coming, it's like the classic entrepreneur fable. Your friends come to you and they're like, okay, help me manage my money. Or, oh, I wish there was this. You said communicating with their partners about sex. Could you say a bit more about kind of what was the challenge that they were experiencing, as archetypes in their own sex lives?
There's so many different layers. You can start with just not feeling comfortable telling your partner that you don't like the way that they initiate sex, or you don't feel comfortable sharing your sexual fantasies, or you don't even know how to tell them what it is that you like or that you don't like, or that, you can't stand the kind of sex that you're having anymore. I wouldn't say that there are like specific archetypes.
Okay.
It was just, we did a survey with over 500 couples to validate the idea. And at the core of couples' desires to want to have more sex, better sex, more variety in sex, what was really limiting them was just being able to have that conversation, because it's such a taboo topic to begin with. And then you don't want to hurt your partner's feelings. And then you're scared of being vulnerable and being shamed by your partner, right? And like, women have that problem, but men especially, because men have been brought up to, be very like fertile and have a lot of desire all the time, and they need to be strong and serious and provide, and so if you sit down and vulnerability is inherently really hard for men, and then you add that layer of like having to be this like sexual powerhouse, then it's an even harder block for men to be able to have that conversation.
I could, if I put, taking the male's perspective in this, I mean, the biggest one I would see is like ego, right? So there's the ego of like, my partner can't climax. There's the ego of, I'm not good at it. There's the ego of performance anxiety. There's probably, when we talk about more like kinky type things, there's the ego of like, am I weird? Am I not straight? Or whatever whatever kind of story you want to go on that. I wonder, like, have you observed, if you look at it from the perspective of a man, do men have a set of struggles, and then do women have a set of struggles, either in the actual act or the communication thereof?
I mean, both. And for both sides, I'd say men deal with a lot of performance anxiety in terms of, erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, delayed ejaculation. There's so many, but because there's so much like mental pressure for men to be able to perform and just like be hard on the spot, they don't realize how much of it is tied to mental health and being able to treat that and find solace in mindfulness. And I think also we're living at a time where it's become a little bit more mainstream, but breath work, meditation, mindfulness, focusing on sensation. These are terms that for a lot of men can feel very woo-woo and foreign and not aligned with the masculinity that they were brought up with. So, and so then it's very easy for you to just seek some sort of medical treatment and, depend on Viagra, for example, right?
Oh.
And
are like 30-year-old men taking Viagra?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's like unprecedented amounts
I'm like beyond that generation. But like in my peer group, not that anyone would admit it. I'm 44, so my peers are in their mid-40s. I think some of them would admit it, like behind closed doors. I've only heard of people that like do coke and then do Viagra like together. But I've never heard of Viagra as a staple to heal these anxieties at that young an age.
No, so when Viagra became over the counter in the UK, there was like unprecedented levels of 19-year-olds taking it. And it's just become very common amongst like younger populations because they already grow up in an anxiety-focused society. And so you can imagine like there's just so much more, especially with porn being more rampant than it was when you were growing up or even when I was growing up. People are just like inherently anxious, and men can't even process being denied or not being able to perform. You know, there's like so much around this that they would just prefer to already take the medicine off the bat. And the problem with depending on Viagra, first of all, it doesn't always work. Sometimes guys are so anxious that anxiety supersedes, you know, the power of Viagra.
Even the
and they're
Viagra.
not able to,
Wow.
yeah. But more than that, like Viagra will get you hard, but it's not going to increase your pleasure because pleasure is really about what's in your head, and your largest sexual organ is your brain. And so if you're just focused on performance the whole time, like you're not actually enjoying the process, right? You're just executing the steps.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with sex is like we were never taught how to have good sex, right? We were taught if you had any sort of sex ed, like you were taught about the technical ways for you to not get pregnant or not impregnate somebody else, condom normally, and how to prevent STIs. I mean, that's the equivalent of going to a cooking class and being taught how to prevent salmonella, but not actually like how to make a delicious plate, right?
Oh, that's a TikTok clip right there. That's so you're so spot on in so many ways. I'd love to flip that question, right? So put a pin and come back to it. The performance anxiety. I'm still like, I can't believe that like 19-year-olds it's like the last thing I needed at 19 was Viagra.
Right.
So, but I had, many of those performance anxiety issues. If you flip the role to women, the biggest struggle or the biggest kind of question that you get asked from women, and let's like kind of take men and women separately, that put couples together.
Right.
What are the most common challenges that women, even in your surveys, where they come to you with?
Two things. One is not being able to orgasm or having a lot of difficulty coming to the orgasm. And the second one is actually feeling any desire for sex, right? Like just low libido across the board. And it's really complex because, we're talking mainly about men this whole time, but the women grow up being taught that they need to protect themselves from sex, that if they have sex, they're giving something away, while men are like gaining something, that you need to protect your virginity, and virginity is a social construct. So, there's so much already that inherently like makes the woman feel so small around this and not feel comfortable expressing her sexuality and her sexual self, while the man is like free to do whatever and fully express that. But even more, women are taught to be agreeable and to place everybody else's priorities before their own. And so the way that this manifests in bed is they have a really hard time asking for what they want because they were taught to please somebody else. And since we're, talking about heteronormative sexual relationships, like then you're just focused on pleasing the man. If you're taking too long to come, you're worried that you're taking too long to come and therefore you're being a nuisance. And so you're like, it's okay. Like, maybe you'll fake coming or you'll just say don't worry about it, which leads to dissatisfaction. And honestly, just also having a huge issue with body image, right? Like men also deal with body dysmorphia, but women deal with it on a greater level. And it's really hard for you to enjoy sex if you're worried about how your stomach looks, right?
Yeah. Wow. It's like the second thing you said, which is it's almost like the cultural and societal systems that we're born into are this huge kind of mountain to overcome for women in a sexual relationship. I mean, as you're saying everything, I'm nodding. I'm like, yep, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. So we'll come back to that. But let's talk about the topic everyone wants to talk about is female orgasms. And so you said that one of the biggest challenges is that women struggle to have orgasms. Is there a statistic on that? Is it like X percentage of women have never or rare fake or do you know of any?
Oh, more than 50% fake it. Have faked it at least
fellas.
once. I mean, I have in the past, I don't do it anymore, but yes. And about 10% of women have never had an orgasm, though the problem with these statistics that have to do with sex is it's really hard for you to get, a proper snapshot of the reality because people have such a hard time admitting to things, right? I know that statistics in general, you shouldn't take them at face value, but I feel like sexual statistics are even harder for you to grasp, right? But
you think that makes them worse or better? So that 10%.
I think it's much higher. It's higher. Also because what is an orgasm, right? And so I think for people with penises, that can be very obvious. But if you have a vulva, it can be really subjective. They say that if you don't know if you've had one, you haven't had one. There's also a school of thought in sexology that's like, well, but orgasms come in different waves and they feel different each time. And so you also don't want to shame anybody if they don't know if they've had one. But like the literal definition of an orgasm is involuntary, like rhythmic contractions of the pelvic floor muscle. So what happens is like the capillaries in your genital region, normally blood flows in and out of them. And when you're aroused, the blood just like accumulates until there's like a release. And then that's when the rhythmic contractions happen. I think that's like the clearest explanation of what it is. But the problem for women is, let's start off with the fact that like we don't know our genital region, right? Like men grow up like looking at it and playing with it and they're like all proud of it or whatever. And women, because we are like subconsciously or consciously taught that it's something that needs to be protected, that's dirty, we don't even look at it in the mirror. A lot of women just have never seen what it actually looks like down there or naming the different parts of their vulva. And I mean, I grew up hearing that my vulva was a vagina, right? Like the vagina is what you think of like the whole region, but that's not true. Like the external region with the clitoris and the labia, that's the vulva, right? And so we've just done such a disservice to that. And if you look through social media, like the word vulva is shadow banned while or completely banned while penis is not. And like the vulva is the equivalent of the penis. Like if we were to think about this applied to men, it's like calling your penis your testicles because penis is too harsh of a word, right? Like you're doing such a disservice when you don't. It's like language matters, right?
Yeah.
And so first of all, we don't know our bodies. And for a very long time, and Freud, unfortunately, has done such a disservice to our society because we were also taught that if you didn't orgasm through vaginal orgasm, through penetration, like there's something wrong with you. You're broken, right? And so they've done studies where now we know that only 15% of women can orgasm from penetration alone without any clitoral stimulation.
15%.
Yeah, 15. So
once again, sorry, fellas.
So you need to be stimulating it, right? And the reason why, so Freud's theory was that if you orgasmed only through clitoral stimulation, you were sexually and psychologically immature. What?
I've actually never heard this.
Yeah.
But this is like a dominant.
Yeah.
I could see it playing out as a cultural narrative that orgasms through penetration are the real orgasms, right?
Because penis has always been a symbol of fertility and power and domination. Yeah. And so if the penis is not making the woman come on its own, like, what does that say about men, right?
Yeah. So 15%. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I thought for a long time that I was broken because I was never having an orgasm through penetration alone until later on in my 20s, I discovered that I needed more stimulation in other areas, right, on my clitoris. So it just takes a lot of you have to overcome knowing your body and also overcoming the shame of exploring it. Because how many friends do I have that are like, I just feel really uncomfortable touching myself down there, or I don't like it when my partner goes down, even though they want to. To me, it just feels icky, and you need to overcome so much shame and so many blocks that women are dealing with a lot.
So the 10K work is really in around the clitoris, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the highest leverage for all parties. So I guess so let's say you're a couple in that 15% or in that 85% where your partner can climax from intercourse. Where do you go from there, right? Is it oral? Is it sex toys? Is it where does one go? Because even for someone who's pretty open to all this stuff, I'd be like, I don't know. I'm actually thinking, well, I don't really talk about this with other people. I don't talk about it that much with Lisa. My only point of reference is porn, which is let's just throw that point of reference out the window. I've never read a book about sex. So where would I'm not going to talk to my, elders about it. I'm like, where the fuck would anyone learn about this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, obviously today, me and,
TikTok.
TikTok, working with a sex therapist or a sex coach. There truly are. And one of the things that we're building out at Wanderlust is a library of courses for people to explore, their pleasure, intimacy, and improve their relationships. And so it really that's what I love about where we're at in the sexual wellness industry, is just really bringing out the education and the tools that help people build a fulfilling sex life. And to me, that's consequently tied to building a fulfilling relationship as well. But it really depends on the person. I'd say it's twofold. One, if the person feels a lot of shame, one strategy done in coaching is the person needs to feel comfortable touching themselves, masturbating on their own, and then slowly start integrating their partner into the same space. So that your partner's outside the door from your bathroom, and your partner's conscious that you're doing that, right? It's just so you start getting comfortable with the idea of your partner being together while you are being pleasured, even if by yourself, eventually integrating that together. But there's also, personally, I think that the easiest way for you to get there is through sex toys. There's so many great vibrators out there that focus on that. There's a clitoral suction one that just it gets the job done, and it's focused on the bean. There's the bullet vibrator, which is a smaller one that is an easier point of entrance in terms of in terms of exploring sex toys, right?
We'll
That's the simplest one. Yeah.
I would suspect that most of the people, it's probably 65% men listening, they literally have no one to have this conversation with. So I thank you for this. And you start Googling this stuff and it's just a fucking, you're Googling anything sex related, you're either down porn alley or just some weird fucking internet rabbit hole. So you said there's the suction. I might text you after together. There's a suction.
Yeah.
The magic bullet I've heard of. There's the classic, the OK Boomer, which would be the wand, the from Sex and the City, the magic wand.
Yeah, there was the rabbit also that was big on the Sex and the City. The rabbit is because it originally is from Japan, and in Japan they had this, I don't know if the word is correct, but the indecency law. So basically, instead of it looking like, a sex toy, they had to make it look like a toy. So they put the rabbit on there to
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Today it's obviously not an issue anymore, but yeah, there's so many different things that you can explore together, and it's such a great way for you to add novelty in bed. Listen, I know men that feel the vibrator is, it's it plays against them and they're competing with the vibrator. We're not competing with the vibrator. The vibrator, you will never be substituted by a vibrator because it's human touch and connection, right?
Yeah.
So it really is, you need to see it as an ally and a way to just, spice things up and add value while you're in bed together. And
are all these sex toys clitoral stimulators, different versions.
They can be, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also like vaginal penetration focused, toys. There are ones that do both at the same time, clitoral and vaginal, It's just a matter of testing and seeing what works. And
baby
being
testing, fellas.
Yeah, being open-minded about it. And if you don't like something, that's fine. You can just, put it away and try something different. I think that we forget that sex is really about play, and it's adults' play, right? Like we lose that from our childhood, and so we take it so seriously, like it's a pass-fail test. And that's the problem that's the reason why I think we're also just not having good sex, is that we take it so seriously and we don't want to explore and be more open-minded about it and really take the time to have fun with it, right?
Yeah. Because again, I'm dating myself, when you look at sex toys, I'm thinking, 1990s Times Square. It's just so disgusting, just like veiny penises, like in the, veiny dildos in the storefront, and like shit, really gross porn. What does like the joint exploration of sex toys look like, in the age of Sweet Green and Allbirds?
Chances are your neighborhood has like a nicely curated sex shop. If it doesn't, there are different brands online that you can search for. Like, obviously, there are the big platforms like Love Honey that has everything and that you can explore together. But brands that I think that make it perhaps a more approachable and tasteful experience are Mod, Dame, Unbound Babes. They provide so much variety and just great entry points to products that look a little bit more approachable for people. Goop also has a great platform. So every couple is different, and so it's just like, hey, what do you want to try together? Like, would you be curious about trying this stimulation? Like, there are vibrators for men too, right? Like, there are penis rings that you can explore. Do you want to purchase, handcuffs for you to try something a little bit lighter, or maybe even a scarf in order for you to, and purchase a feather or a tissue or something that you can just like use to stimulate your partner in other parts of their bodies, like non-genital focused regions, right? And really think about it as like, there's that song, like, your body is a wonderland. And I feel very strongly about that. Like, we don't take that into consideration. We focus so much on having like the same routine sex that we generally have. And we don't put any thought into this part of our lives that's like so important, because when you're comfortable with your sexuality, honestly, like you're so much more confident in your life, and it really changes your relationship to the world. I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah.
But instead we prioritize work and nutrition and exercise, and because we're still overcoming a lot of stigma even with ourselves that we even need any help with this, right?
Yeah. As I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about, we went through like a lot of the tactics of like, oh, there's this toy and there's this, the clitoral, stimulation, et cetera, et cetera. But there's almost this like much bigger question at play, right? And you said, with women, it's like body dysmorphia. And with men, it's kind of the role that the man is supposed to play as this like fertile, virile, penis-driven economy. And like, I know how hard it is to unwind many of these stories in just our like with work, for example. It's like common question that we talk about in this podcast: how do I separate my work life from my identity? Right? That's a hard question, and it has zero taboos associated with it. And it's, you can kind of in theory figure it out by yourself. But something like it's almost, I see a link with like marriage therapy, where it's, Lisa and I always say, it's like, I bring all my shit, to the table. You bring all your shit to the table, and then our shit dances with each other. And so it's like 3 layers of shit, you know?
Yeah.
And so how does honestly, it feels, I'm like way less optimistic talking to you in that it just feels so layered. And right, it's almost like if your partner's insecure about their body, it's like, it feels like it's such a hard, that's such a hard thing to overcome. And, part of it comes from the person that's feeling insecure themselves. Their partner can support them. And I'm sure there's ways, but it's like, how do you even get those, like the mutual interaction there, right? Well, so talk me off the cliff on why I shouldn't be so pessimistic and daunted by this question of, what's the secret to good sex?
Because I feel like at the end of the day, people want to connect and they want to feel seen, right? And they want to feel desired. And so if you're putting in the effort to connect and communicate with your partner and understand, like, what are their blocks and how can you support them right now? And also you feeling like there's that open channel for you to share that as well, right? Like, when you're vulnerable with each other, like, that's really hot. And that's an inherent turn on when you finally feel like you're having these breakthroughs with your partner. And it can be small stuff, but, how many partners don't express to their partners that they look good, like when they look good, right? Like, they just assume that their partner knows. And it's these small steps of letting them know, like, hey, you look really good, or sending them a message in the middle of the day, like, I can't wait to see you later on, checking in with them. Like, we get into this routine of assuming that the way that it is, you already know everything about your partner, or that you don't need to put in that extra effort because we take things for granted. And, love is a choice. I believe that very strongly. Like, every single day you make the choice of loving that person and, like, building a life together. And so it should therefore be a choice for you to also seduce them on a daily basis, right? Like, and it's not the big stuff. Like, you don't need to book, an incredible trip abroad.
Yeah.
Like, it really is just remembering them when you're at the store, or sitting down and really listening to them at the end of the day. Like, how was your day? And making your partner truly feel seen. A lot of people come home and they have 0 energy left, right? And that can be a really hard transition. But one thing that I always mention is try to create your ritual. So for some people, it is like, I need to take a shower when I get home. So I have those 5 or 10 minutes on my own to kind of like switch into like I'm at home mode. Or, you like to cook, or you want to go out for a walk, or it's breath work. Like, you take 5 minutes to do breath work to really like round yourself and be like, okay, now I'm with my partner. And when you are with your partner, it truly is asking and being curious about them. Like, we also stop being curious about our partners because we assume we know everything about them, and people change over time, and like new things come up. And Cody Sanchez shared that she has this team method that she practices with her husband every night. I don't remember exactly what each acronym stands for, but they sit down together and they share one new thing that they learned. They touch each other, like, putting their hands on each other, or hugging. And it's a moment for you to communicate and connect, right? People just don't cultivate that space. And even if it's like a 10-minute, like, you have 10 minutes per day to do that with your partner. If you choose not to, that's a choice. Like, you're not putting in that effort anymore,
It's funny because as you're talking, if someone didn't know the topic of our podcast, it's like feeling seen, like gentle touch, and asking how was your day, switching out of work mode, rediscovering your partner, redating your partner. My words, not yours. If someone heard that, they would it's like how to be a good spouse, right? And is that, I mean, I feel like maybe there's an analogy like productivity. It's like you go into a productivity and you want someone to be like, you take this widget and you put it with this widget, and then you put it and you string it together with this widget, and then you like snap your fingers and this cool thing happens. It's almost like people want to believe that with sex, but really, like in productivity, it's like, do you know what you need to do? Do you know why you're not doing it? And do you know when you need to do it by, right? It's like, if you just answer those 3 questions, you're going to be super productive. And all the wizardry and the gadgetry is just noise. And so it is, I mean, I feel like that's such a anticlimactic, no pun intended.
Yeah.
It's such an anticlimactic conclusion, but also very, very accessible in some much more accessible than like making my partner come through, vaginal intercourse, right? And so if someone listening, let's give an answer for men and for women. They're like, I want to get better at the soft stuff, not like more sex toys and all that. What would you recommend for men to read or to learn about or to practice? And what would you recommend for a woman? And maybe if there's a different one, what would you recommend for a couple?
Yeah. So there's this great book called Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Nagoski. It talks a lot about the female pleasure, but just like pleasure in general and how our libido works. But there's a great exercise here from what we were talking about before about body image and how you can improve it. So this is like a really practical way for people to work through that. This is one of my favorite books, Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel, and it explains why we get bored with sex in our long-term relationships. It's fantastic. There's another book that I would recommend for couples. So Tell Me About the Last Time You Had Sex by Dr. Ian Kerner. And this book has, it's almost like you're doing a one-on-one with this therapist, and he has worksheets for you to go through with your partner, and it's a really fantastic book. But, when we're talking about the body image problems, like it is really making sure that your partner feels comfortable and like letting, like verbalizing, like, I do desire you and I think you look great, and being supportive and having these communications. Like, if you have been initiating the same way and you are always getting denied, like ask your partner why. I see this so commonly. It's like, oh, like they just don't care for sex anymore. Like it's just not working. But it's like, well, maybe it's the way that you're initiating that's not working. And then I always hear, well, yeah, but then it's normally the woman, she never initiates, right? But women also have had their sexuality suppressed for so long that they feel almost slutty asking for sex, right? Like there's this block as well. So it really is rooted in, again, communication and asking your partner what it is that they need in order to feel desired and to desire, right? There's this really great study, this data point that's like, men tend to get really turned on when they see the woman turned on, but women tend to get turned on when they see that the man is turned on by them. So like sex is inherently, like it's inherently narcissistic. And yet we just have a really hard time understanding that and owning it, right? But really, like foreplay starts the last time that you had sex. And so it's how you're treating your partner on a daily basis and providing these pockets of eroticism and to take place, and for you to build that sensuality and make your partner, feel seen and loved and desired. So, when you're just initiating, like when you just try to seduce your partner, when you're trying to initiate sex, like that's not going to work for a reason, right?
Listening to you talk, I'm just going through myself. I'm a very self-improvement driven person, I read books on productivity, I read books on work, I read books on investing and making myself better in different ways. But there's still this kind of, as you listing up these books, you would think that my natural reaction would be like, move it to the top of the queue. But there's still like this, like, even for me, this feels very comfortable talking about a lot of this stuff. It's still like, but it's this, there's something just like, it's just different. When it comes to sex, everything feels different than being good at your job, right? It's like no one ever would second guess, like, I'm going to read this book to be good at my job. They're like, go do it as fast as you fucking can. And then it's like, no, read this book to better understand. I'm just like sharing what I'm thinking out loud. I think that there's like I'd be lying if I didn't say that there's like a mild amount of like selfishness, which is like, well, like I always orgasm, right? And look, let's call a spade, right? But I care deeply. And so I guess the real question is like, do you say you care deeply, or do you like actually care deeply, right? Because you've given us many different ways to go about in, at least like it from an individual perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a two-way street. Like, I mean, I absolutely prioritize my pleasure when I'm in bed, but I also care a lot when my partner, like how my partner is enjoying it and making sure that he comes too and all of that, right? But there is like a moment in time in the middle of the sexual experience when you're like, all right, like this is going to be a little bit more about me now, and then I'll give back. And when you're with a partner who does not care, it is really hard. And like, can you go through therapy and workshops and try to find ways where you both meet in the middle? Sure. Right. But if you are with an inherently selfish partner, like it can be really hard for you to build a fulfilling sex life together. Right. I think that's just so important, like, because it's a give and take. And you need to make sure that you're both feeling desired. One thing that I did want to mention, though, and that's something that Esther Perel talks about in her book, is, oftentimes like women think that they have no more desire, sexual desire, and it's usually because they don't like the sex that they're having. Like they're just really bored, right? But they also don't know any better. Like you don't know that there are other like forms of exploration and other types of sex out there. And the thing is that, one, like there's just a lack of seduction and setting the mood, and again, like creating that sensuality between the two of you. And it's like what you did in the beginning when you used to date, and there was, you're building up that excitement for your date night, and you're already imagining how it's going to be. A really great way for couples to do this is to actually schedule sex. It doesn't need to necessarily be sex when it happens, but it's like that this is going to be our moment of intimacy, and that can build so much excitement because you know that that's going to happen, and you can explore different things in that time frame. Like maybe you have wanted to try tying each other up. Like you don't know if it's going to work out or not, if you're going to laugh the whole time, like if it's going to be a shit show or if it's going to be really hot. But like, what are the chances of like that 15-minute window that you have like available spontaneously, you're going to try something new, right? Like probably not. So look at these scheduled moments as opportunities for you to try something new. Like for me, it's like lingerie. Like if I don't usually, I'm not wearing that super sexy thing like on a daily basis, but then if I know that we have something planned, like I'll wear it and I know he likes it, and it already, creates that excitement. So it really is about cultivating these moments that allow you to explore without that added pressure. And I will just end this rant with, we tend to think of sex as like it's penetration, and maybe there's like oral involved, but that is such a limited form of what sex is. And they've done a study with homosexual couples, and they tend to have like an infinite number of sex scripts compared to what heterosexual couples do. And heterosexual couples they'll kiss, maybe they'll do some oral, and they'll go straight to penetration, and then it's done. That's kind of like how that sex script goes. Wow. Whereas, like homosexual couples tend to, explore like mutual masturbation and, and cuddling, and like so many different ways for you to actually explore pleasure.
Wow. That's profound. I think that's the first word that came out of my mouth. I'm like, yeah, that shit's deep. Well, I wanted to end maybe with like a speed round of sorts, in that I think that like everyone has these questions that, and instead of just like, we'll just like do them really quick. So like maybe like 20, 30 second answers, because we have the expert.
I'm going to try.
Yeah. No, I feel, to expect you to know all. Open marriages, usually successful or unsuccessful?
It really depends.
Really depends.
Open marriages require you to have like crystal clear communication and be very organized with your agenda, right? Like if it's already hard for you to manage the expectations of like one partner, imagine multiple partners. So it's like communicate and communicate more and some more and some more, and make sure that you have that agenda like really well organized for when you're going to meet somebody, if something comes up unexpectedly, how you're going to deal with it. And also just like being open to closing again, right? I have a few close friends who opened it up, had some fun for years, and then closed it. Like they realized it's like not that point in time that they wanted it anymore. And, you know, they're doing well. Also, the last thing I'm going to say about this is closed marriages like also don't work out, right? Like first time marriages, 50% end in divorce. So like there's this stigma with the open marriage, but it's like both are at the risk of ending, and both have like high chances of ending as well, right?
Yeah. Ooh, good one. Okay. Next one. Watching porn with your partner. How to do that effectively?
So it depends if your partner is open to it, because people can feel really triggered by it. But I would say search for ethical porn sites that have more of a female gaze to it, because, you know, traditional porn really has that like very like strong male oriented, like the thrusting and sort of like a more violent approach and unrealistic, you know, expectations.
You mean Lisa's not into the whole like young student falls for the school teacher story?
Yeah, or like the stepdad, or, you know, the babysitter, like, you know, but more than that, it's like there's a plot behind it, right? With an ethical porn. So ethical porn itself means that the actors are being well treated and they're being paid properly. But that's also become synonymous with more like female gaze focused platforms like Make Love Not Porn, Afterglow, big-ohs. And they're great. Like it's a great way for you to explore something that can be a little bit more softer and more inviting for the two of you. I think it's also just really important to share with your partner, like, this is an awesome way for us to explore what it is that we like and that we don't like. And we can also not watch it if it doesn't feel right. Right? Like, but again, sex is about play and being open-minded and understanding that, like, if you don't like something, that's totally okay. You've explored that. It's not for you. But it can be a great turn on for couples. Like, I've seen that, especially after having kids, really revive relationships. Sexual relationships, yeah.
Okay, last question is kind of related. Swingers clubs, sex parties. My town supposedly is notorious for them. I've never been invited.
Really?
So I've never said, don't know if like we don't cut the, you know, I think we'd be good participants, but I guess the question, more common, maybe let's do it. So like, more common than you think, less common than you think.
More common for sure.
More common.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. It can also be a great way to explore. Like, sex parties they're also an opportunity for you can just go and grab a drink and check it out and like not partake of it at all. And depends on where you're going, and there are sex parties for every different type of interest. And there's like some super exclusive ones that you have to pay like $400,000 a year to be a part of, and it's like just the celebrities, and, you know, it's crazy. It's a whole world out there. And there's even that app called Feeld, Feeld. And it's an app that, you know, for non-monogamous people. And you can, you know, couples that want to explore meeting other couples or another single person and bring them into bed. Like, that's also an app where you can, I'm mentioning this because there's the demand for that app, right? Like there's demand for all of these. Yeah. And older couples, I read this somewhere where like statistically it tends to be older couples that engage in group sex, because I mean, it's like you've tried everything, you're like together for a long time, and you're like, what the heck, you know? But
you're probably more comfortable in everything, like comfortable in your relationship, comfortable in your body. You know, I picture these sex parties, you know, like some Stanley Kubrick, you know, like 22-year-old hot models and, and ripped dudes, and it's like mid-50s. They're like, yeah, we're just really comfortable with who we are.
Yeah. But it is a lot more common than we imagine.
Wow. Like I said, that was the last one, but one more, maybe not speed round, but we have a community that is very open to coaching and therapy and so on. I'm not surprised that there are sex coaches, but I never, where does one go find one? What does that look like? Is it on Zoom? Tell us a little bit more about the sex coaching practice.
Right. It's on Zoom, it's in person. There's so many different resources. One that I recommend wholeheartedly is the Modern Intimacy. It's a friend of mine who is a sex therapist. She runs it, Dr. Kate Balistrieri, and she has a group of therapists and coaches in there that also specialize in different things that can be interesting for people to explore. But really, if you do Google it, or if you even search with that name in Instagram search bar, different people are going to come up so that you can understand what it is that you need and if anybody resonates with you. But there's a huge demand for it, and it's growing. And if you don't feel comfortable working, or if you can't afford working one-on-one with someone, there are workshops out there. There are different apps as well. There's Coral app and Furly for women. So there are different options, and that's also one of the reasons why Wonderlust is coming out with courses so that people can also do them at their own pace and have that support, because sometimes we just have a really hard time showing face with somebody that we don't really know.
Amazing. I could talk. We're going to have to do a round two because I was like, I got my homework.
Totally open to it. Yeah, I just realized I had so much more as well, but it's a complex topic, and it's important that we normalize the conversation because everybody goes through, their own insecurities and traumas and difficulties, and then we just don't know where to look for help, and we feel very alone in this, and we also don't tend to see our partners as allies, unfortunately, even though we should. So it can create so much more frustration, and then sometimes it's easier to just archive it and say that you're no longer interested. But when you are, it makes you feel so alive, right? It's so empowering.
And it's funny because the podcast is called the Examined Life Podcast because the unexamined life is not worth living. And so it's the same thing for sex life. It's right. The unexamined sex life is not worth living, right? And so what does an examined sex life look like? Which is no different than what does an examined work life look like, and what does an examined relationship with your kids look like parenting relationships. So it's funny, there's still I'm still gonna be a little not shook up, but disoriented from talking about so many taboos in such I've talked about more taboo topics in this past hour than I have in 7 years of my life. And those 7 years, it's usually with drunk guy friends when it's not even a productive conversation on the topic. It's just some rant or some fetish or something like that. So I thank you so much. And you've given us so much actionable stuff. I'm actually I'll go back with you to get the full list of things so that you can kind of help us coordinate that.
For sure. I'll send that over.
And tell our listeners where they can learn more about you, about Wonderlust, about the intimacy card game. We'll put it all in the show notes, but tell us.
Our website is wonderlust.co, Wonderlust with an O. And my handles are Natassia B. Miller, and Natassia spelled a little differently. It's Natassia B. Miller. And also Wonderlust handles are Join Wonderlust. And you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Natassia.
I really appreciate it.
What a gift. And talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.